guys. Tonight we begin with love psychology. Those quiet experiences the mind creates when the day finally lets go. Before you get comfortable, if calm, thoughtful videos like this help you unwind, you can gently like the video or subscribe, only if it feels right. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, let the room soften, and slowly drift with me through the quiet psychology of love psychology. Love begins not as a choice, but as an ancient whisper carried through time. Long before words existed, before cities rose or languages formed, the human body already knew how to reach for another. It knew the warmth of closeness, the safety found in presence, the quiet need to be held. This is not poetry. This is biology speaking in its oldest dialect. The brain, soft and patient, has spent millennia learning that survival is easier when we are not alone. And so love, in its earliest form, was simply this: a tether between two beings, woven from necessity and softened into something tender over countless generations. When you feel drawn to another person, when their presence settles something restless inside you, you are not experiencing something new. You are hearing an echo from deep within your evolutionary past. The same neural circuits that once kept our ancestors close to their kin, that made them return to the same fire each night, are still humming quietly in your mind today. Love is the brain's way of saying, here is someone who makes the world less uncertain. Here is a place where I can rest. And the body listens. The heartbeat slows. The breath deepens. The nervous system, so often braced for danger, begins to soften. Psychologists have long understood that attachment is not a luxury. It is a fundamental human need, as essential as food or sleep. Infants who are held and soothed develop differently than those who are not. Their brains form pathways of trust, patterns of expectation that tell them the world is a place where comfort can be found. These early experiences shape everything that comes after. They become the quiet foundation upon which all future relationships are built. And though we grow older, though we learn to stand on our own and navigate the world independently, that early need never fully disappears. It simply transforms, becoming more subtle, more complex, but no less real. Love, then, is not weakness. It is not dependence or fragility. It is the mind's natural response to a world that can feel vast and indifferent. When you love someone, your brain is doing what it was designed to do, creating bonds that offer stability, forming connections that make survival not just possible, but meaningful. There is a reason why isolation feels so difficult, why loneliness aches in a way that few other experiences do. The brain interprets disconnection as a kind of danger, a signal that something essential is missing. And when connection is restored, when you find yourself in the presence of someone who sees you and stays, the relief is profound. It is not drama. It is the nervous system returning to balance, the mind recognizing that it is no longer alone. Scientists have spent decades mapping the biology of attachment, and what they have found is both simple and astonishing. Love activates regions of the brain associated with reward, motivation, and emotional regulation. When you think of someone you care for deeply, your brain releases chemicals that mirror the effects of calm and contentment. The hypothalamus, that small but powerful structure deep within the brain, begins to coordinate a cascade of responses. stress hormones decrease. The body's inflammatory responses quiet. Even pain is perceived differently when you are in the presence of someone you love. This is not metaphor. Studies have shown that holding the hand of a loved one can reduce the experience of physical pain, can make medical procedures more bearable, can help the body heal more quickly. The mind and body are not separate. They are one system, always listening to each other, always responding to the presence or absence of connection. And yet, love is not constant intensity. It is not always the rush of early infatuation or the drama of longing. More often, it is quiet. It is the steady hum of familiarity, the comfort of knowing someone well enough that their presence requires no performance. This is where love deepens, not in grand gestures or declarations, but in the slow accumulation of ordinary moments. The brain begins to associate a person with safety, with predictability, with a kind of emotional anchor that makes the rest of life feel more manageable. And over time, this association becomes so deeply embedded that their absence can feel like a disruption, a sudden instability in a system that had learned to rely on their presence. There is a particular kind of peace that comes from being loved not for who you pretend to be, but for who you act to. LIR, this is what the mind seeks most. Not perfection, not endless excitement, but the simple recognition that you are enough as you are. When that recognition is felt, when someone's gaze softens around your imperfections rather than sharpens, something in the nervous system unclenches. The constant vigilance that so many of us carry, the fear that we must always be more or better or different, begins to fade. And in its place, a quieter state emerges. One where rest is possible, where vulnerability does not feel like risk, but like relief. This is the soft science of human attachment. Not cold equations or sterile data, but the warm, patient observation of how people find each other and hold on. How the brain learns, gradually and without fanfare, to trust. How the body responds to the presence of another with a cascade of calming signals. How love, in its truest form, is simply the nervous system recognizing that it has found a place where it can finally, gently, let go. As we drift deeper into this quiet landscape, the story of love becomes the story of learning. The brain does not arrive into the world knowing how to love. It must be taught, not through lessons or instructions, but through experience, through the slow repetition of presence and care. Every time a caregiver responds to a cry, every time a hand reaches out and is met with another hand, the brain is taking notes. It is forming patterns, building expectations, creating a map of what safety feels like. And this map, drawn in the earliest years of life, will guide every relationship that follows. Neuroscientists call this process neural plasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself based on experience. But beneath that clinical term lies something far more tender. It is the story of how the mind learns to recognize love. At first, the infant brain is chaotic, flooded with sensations it cannot yet organize. But then comes a voice, familiar and soothing. Comes a touch, gentle and consistent. And slowly, the brain begins to associate these sensations with relief. The neural pathways that connect sensory input to emotional response start to strengthen, to become more efficient. What once required conscious effort, what once felt new and uncertain, becomes automatic. The mind learns that this person equals comfort, that this presence equals safety. And once learned, this knowledge settles deep, becoming part of the foundation upon which the self is built. This is why early relationships matter so profoundly. Not because they are inherently better or more important than later ones, but because they occur at a time when the brain is most open, most willing to be shaped. The patterns established in childhood, the expectations formed about how others will respond, do not simply disappear as we age. They linger, influencing how we interpret the actions of others, how we approach new relationships, how willing we are to trust. Someone who learned early that their needs would be met develops a different internal landscape than someone who learned that the world is unpredictable. That comfort cannot be relied upon. And both carry these landscapes with them, often without conscious awareness, into every connection they form. But the brain's capacity to learn does not end with childhood. It continues, slowly and steadily, throughout life. Every relationship becomes an opportunity to revise the old patterns, to update the map. When you meet someone who responds to you with consistency, who shows up even when it is inconvenient, who remains steady even when you falter, your brain takes note. It begins to recalibrate. The old expectations, formed in a different time with different people, start to soften. New pathways form, ones that reflect this current reality rather than the past. This is the quiet power of love over time. It does not erase what came before, but it offers an alternative, a new way of being that feels safer, steadier, more aligned with who you are now. The process is not fast. The brain is cautious, protective of the patterns it has spent years building. It tests new information against old assumptions, looking for consistency, for proof that this time will be different. And so love, real love, requires patience. It requires the repetition of small, reliable actions over months and years. It requires showing up not just in moments of intensity, but in the quiet, unremarkable stretches in between. Because it is in those ordinary moments that the brain finally begins to believe, that the nervous system starts to relax, that the old defenses, necessary once, but exhausting now, can slowly be set down. There is a particular neural network that becomes active when we think about people we are close to. It is called the default mode network, and it governs our sense of self, our memories, our ability to imagine the future. When you love someone deeply, they become woven into this network. Thinking about them is no longer separate from thinking about yourself. Their well-being matters to you not as an abstract concept, but as a felt need, as urgent and immediate as your own. This is not codependence. It is integration. It is the brain recognizing that your life and theirs are now interconnected, that their presence has become part of the structure that holds you upright. And so the mind learns to love through experience, through the slow accumulation of moments that tell it, again and again, you are not alone. The learning is patient. It does not demand perfection or constant attention. It simply asks for consistency, for the steady, repeated message that this person will remain, that their care is not conditional on your performance, that the bond between you is strong enough to weather uncertainty. And when that message is received often enough, when the brain has gathered enough evidence to trust it, something shifts. Love stops feeling like effort. It becomes the baseline, the quiet hum beneath everything else, the place the mind returns to when the day grows long and the world grows heavy. Far beneath that quiet surface, where thoughts dissolve into chemistry, the brain speaks in molecules. Love, for all its poetry, is also a conversation between neurotransmitters, a delicate balance of chemicals that shift and flow in response to connection. When you are near someone you care for, when their voice reaches your ear or their hand finds yours, the brain begins to release oxytocin. It is often called the bonding hormone, though that name hardly captures its elegance. Oxytocin is ancient, found in nearly all mammals, a molecular signature of closeness that predates language, predates even complex thought. It rises during childbirth, during nursing, during moments of intimacy and trust. And its effect is unmistakable, a softening, a quiet lowering of defenses, a sense that the world, for this moment at least, is safe. But oxytocin does not work alone. Love is not one chemical, but many, each contributing to the larger experience. Dopamine surges in the early stages of attraction, bringing with it a sense of excitement, of possibility. It is the molecule of anticipation, the feeling that something wonderful is about to unfold. This is why new love can feel so consuming, why the thought of someone can hijack your attention and pull you away from everything else. The brain is rewarding you for seeking connection, encouraging you to move closer, to invest in this bond. But dopamine, for all its intensity, is not built to last forever. It is a spark, not a steady flame. And as the relationship deepens, as familiarity replaces novelty, the chemistry begins to shift. This is not a loss. It is a transformation. As dopamine's intensity fades, other systems take its place. Endorphins, the body's natural opioids, begin to flow more consistently. They bring a sense of calm, of well-being, a quiet contentment that does not demand attention, but simply exists, steady and warm. This is the chemistry of long-term love, the feeling of being at home with another person. It lacks the fireworks of early attraction, but it offers something deeper. Stability, peace, the knowledge that this connection does not require constant effort to maintain. The brain has learned to associate this person with safety, and now it rewards that association with a gentle, sustained release of comfort. Serotonin, too, plays its role, regulating mood and emotional balance. When you feel loved, when your relationships are stable and supportive, serotonin levels tend to rise. And with that rise comes a kind of emotional steadiness, a resilience that makes it easier to navigate the challenges of daily life. The brain is not designed to exist in isolation. It functions best within a network of connection, where the presence of others helps regulate its internal states. This is why loneliness can feel so destabilizing, why prolonged isolation can lead to both emotional and physical illness. The chemistry of the brain depends, in part, on the chemistry of connection. And then there is cortisol, the stress hormone, which love has the power to quiet. When you are in the presence of someone you trust, cortisol levels drop. The body's alert system, always scanning for threat, begins to stand down. This is not a small thing. Chronic stress, sustained high levels of cortisol, can damage the brain over time, can impair memory, weaken the immune system, contribute to a host of physical ailments. But love, steady and reliable, acts as a buffer. It tells the body that it can rest, that not everything requires vigilance, that there is at least one place in the world where defenses are not needed. This is part of why loving relationships contribute to longer, healthier lives. It is not magic. It is biology responding to the presence of safety. The chemistry of love is not constant. It ebbs and flows, responding to context, to touch, to voice, to memory. A glance can trigger a cascade of oxytocin. A Chi and D word can shift the balance of serotonin. Even thinking about someone you love activates these systems, reminding the brain that connection exists even in absence. And this is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of love's chemistry. It does not require constant proximity. The brain can hold the feeling of someone, can carry their presence like a quiet anchor, even when they are far away. The bond, once formed, becomes part of the internal landscape, a resource the mind can draw upon when the world feels uncertain. This is why love feels the way it does. Not arbitrary, not purely emotional, but rooted in the deep machinery of the brain. When you say someone makes you feel calm, you are describing oxytocin's influence. When you say you cannot stop thinking about them, you are feeling dopamine's pull. When you say their presence makes everything easier, you are noticing the drop in cortisol, the rise in endorphins, the gentle recalibration of your nervous system toward balance. Love is not separate from the body. It is the body, speaking in its own language, telling you that this connection matters, that this person has become part of how you regulate yourself, how you find your way back to center. And so the chemistry continues, patient and persistent, adjusting itself in response to every interaction, every shared moment, every quiet reassurance that the bond remains. It is not dramatic. It is not always felt, but it is always there, humming beneath the surface, a molecular conversation that sustains the feeling of being held, of being known, of being part of something larger than yourself. In another corner of this ancient world, the mind seeks patterns. It is built to recognize them, to find order in chaos, to create a sense of predictability where none may naturally exist. And nowhere is this more evident than in love, where the brain slowly learns to associate a person with safety through the simple, profound power of repetition. The first time you meet someone, they are a stranger, a collection of unknown variables. But if they return, if their presence becomes regular, something begins to shift. The unfamiliar starts to feel familiar. The uncertain becomes expected. And with that shift, the nervous system begins to relax. Familiarity is not boredom. It is the opposite. It is the brain's recognition that it has gathered enough information to predict what will happen next. And in that prediction lies comfort. When you know how someone will respond, when their patterns of behavior become clear and consistent, the mind no longer needs to remain on high alert. It can soften its vigilance, can redirect its energy away from constant assessment and toward simply being. This is why routines matter in relationships, why the small, repeated gestures, the morning coffee brought without asking, the goodnight text that always arrives, carry so much weight. They are not trivial. They are the building blocks of trust, the evidence the brain uses to determine that this person is reliable, that their care is not fleeting but enduring. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon extensively, and what they have found is both simple and profound. The brain prioritizes familiar stimuli differently than novel ones. Familiar faces activate regions associated with reward and comfort, even when we are not consciously aware of it. There is a reason why a loved one's voice can soothe in a way that a stranger's cannot, why the scent of someone you care for can bring instant calm. The brain has cataloged these sensory details, has linked them to positive outcomes, and now responds to them automatically. This is not conscious thought. It is pattern recognition operating at a level beneath awareness, shaping how you feel without you having to decide. But familiarity alone is not enough. It must be paired with safety. A person can become familiar through repeated exposure, but if that exposure is unpredictable, if it brings harm as often as comfort, the brain learns a different lesson. It learns to brace, to expect inconsistency, to remain perpetually on guard. This is the heart of secure attachment versus insecure attachment. In secure relationships, familiarity and safety arrive together. The person you see again and again is also the person who treats you gently, who responds to your needs, who does not punish you for being vulnerable. And so, the brain learns to associate their presence with relief, with the feeling that you can finally let your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, your defenses rest. This process takes time. The brain is cautious, and rightly so. It has evolved to protect you, to keep you from harm, and it will not declare someone safe after only a few encounters. It needs repetition, consistency, proof that the pattern will hold. This is why trust cannot be rushed, why it must be earned through the slow accumulation of moments where someone shows up, where they do what they said they would do, where their actions align with their words. Each time this happens, the brain's model of that person becomes a little more solid, a little more reliable. And eventually, familiarity becomes something more. It becomes a kind of home. There is a particular peace that comes from being with someone whose presence requires no adjustment. You do not need to perform, do not need to present a version of yourself that is more palatable or impressive. You can simply exist, and that existence is enough. This is what the brain seeks in attachment. Not excitement, not constant novelty, but the deep, abiding sense that you are safe as you are, that the person beside you will not suddenly shift, will not demand more than you can give, will not withdraw their care when you are less than perfect. And when that safety is felt consistently, when the brain has gathered enough evidence to believe it, something extraordinary happens. The nervous system begins to regulate itself more easily. Stress becomes more manageable. The world, with all its unpredictability, feels a little less overwhelming. This is why long-term relationships often feel so different from new ones. The intensity of early attraction, fueled by novelty and uncertainty, gives way to something quieter, but no less powerful. The brain has completed its assessment. It has decided that this person is safe, that their familiarity is not a sign of stagnation, but of stability. And in that stability, deeper forms of intimacy become possible. You can reveal the parts of yourself that are less polished, less confident, because you trust that the pattern will hold, that this person will not use your vulnerability against you. Familiarity, then, is not the enemy of love. It is love's foundation. It is the ground upon which everything else is built. Without it, connection remains shallow, conditional, always tinged with the uncertainty of whether the other person will remain. But with it, with the patient repetition of presence and care, the mind can finally rest. It can stop scanning for danger stop preparing for loss, and simply be present in the warmth of what is. And that, more than anything, is what the brain wants from love. Not drama, not intensity, but the quiet, enduring knowledge that it is safe to stay. And so the story continues, gently unfolding as the mind begins to recognize itself in another. There is a particular kind of intimacy that arises not from words, but from reflection. When you spend time with someone, truly spend time, your nervous systems begin to synchronize. Your breathing adjusts to match theirs. Your heart rate finds a complementary rhythm. Your facial expressions begin to mirror each other without conscious effort. This is not imitation. It is attunement. It is the body's way of saying, I am here with you. I am listening not just with my ears, but with my entire being. And when both people are doing this, when both are leaning into the space between them with openness and attention, something profound occurs. They begin to feel what the other feels, to experience the world through a shared emotional lens. Psychologists call this emotional mirroring, and it is one of the most fundamental ways that love deepens over time. When someone mirrors your emotions, when they respond to your joy with joy, your sadness with compassion, your anxiety with calm, the brain registers this as profound validation. It is the feeling of being seen, not just observed, but truly understood. And that understanding, repeated across countless interactions, creates a bond that feels almost invisible, but is stronger than steel. You no longer need to explain yourself in detail. The other person can sense your state, can read the subtle shifts in your posture or tone, and respond accordingly. This is not mind reading. It is empathy operating at the level of the nervous system, a conversation happening beneath the surface of language. Infants learn to regulate their emotions through mirroring. When a caregiver responds to a baby's distress with soothing tones and gentle touch, the baby's nervous system begins to calm. Over time, the baby learns that overwhelming feelings are temporary, that they can be met and managed, that they do not have to be faced alone. This is the origin of emotional regulation, and it remains essential throughout life. Adults, too, need to be mirrored, need to have their feelings reflected back to them in a way that says, what you are experiencing is real, is understandable, is not too much. When this happens consistently in a relationship, when both people are willing to hold space for the other's emotional reality, the connection becomes a source of stability, a place where difficult feelings can be processed rather than avoided. But mirroring is not only about distress. It is also about joy, about excitement, about the quiet contentment of simply being together. When you share good news with someone and they light up, when their face reflects your happiness back, to you, the pleasure you feel is amplified. The brain releases more dopamine, more oxytocin, reinforcing the bond and the memory of this moment. This is why relationships feel so rewarding when they are healthy. They do not just provide companionship. They provide emotional amplification, a way of experiencing life more fully because someone else is experiencing it with you. There is a rhythm to mirroring, a dance that happens without choreography. One person leans forward, the other leans in. One person's voice softens, the other's follows. It is subtle, often invisible to the people doing it, but an outside observer can see it clearly. This synchronization is a sign of connection, of two nervous systems finding harmony. And the more it happens, the more natural it becomes, until the relationship itself begins to feel like a kind of home frequency, a baseline to which both people return when the world grows chaotic. Not all mirroring is healthy, of course. If one person is consistently anxious and the other mirrors that anxiety back, both can become trapped in a cycle of escalation. This is why emotional regulation matters. The goal is not to match every feeling exactly, but to respond in a way that helps the other person find balance. If someone is panicking, mirroring their panic does not help, but mirroring their underlying need for safety, for reassurance, for steady presence, that can make all the difference. This is the art of attuned responding, and it is learned through practice, through paying attention, through being willing to set aside your own immediate reactions in order to meet the other person where they are. The brain rewards this kind of attunement. When you feel understood, when someone responds to you in a way that matches your emotional needs, the nervous system relaxes, cortisol decreases, oxytocin rises. The sense of being alone with your feelings begins to fade, replaced by the awareness that you are part of a dyad, a unit that is greater than the sum of its parts. And this awareness, this felt sense of shared emotional space, is what allows love to feel safe. It is not that conflict disappears or that challenges become easy. It is that you know, deep in your bones, that whatever arises, you will face it together. That the other person will not turn away, will not dismiss what you feel, will stay present even when it is uncomfortable. This is the quiet power of emotional mirroring. It is not grand or dramatic. It is small, repeated acts of attention, of responsiveness, of being willing to let your own emotional state be influenced by the person you love. And in those small acts, a foundation is built, one that can hold joy and sorrow, excitement and fear, certainty and doubt. One that says, without words, you are not alone in this. I am here, matching your rhythm, holding your experience alongside my own, creating a space where both of us can be fully, messily, beautifully human. Far beneath that quiet surface, where words lose their power and only presence remains, the mind begins to build something that cannot be hurried. Trust does not arrive in a single moment, does not announce itself with fanfare or certainty. It is constructed slowly, incrementally, through the patient layering of experience upon experience. Each time someone says they will call and then calls, each time they promise to stay and then stay, the brain takes note. It adds this information to a growing file, a collection of evidence that is being quietly evaluated, weighed against past disappointments and future hopes. And when the evidence reaches a certain threshold, when the pattern has repeated enough times to feel reliable, something shifts. The armor begins to lower. The vigilance begins to ease. Trust, tentative and fragile at first, begins to take root. Psychologists speak of trust as a prediction. The brain is always trying to anticipate what will happen next, and trust is simply the prediction that someone will act in your best interest, that they will not cause harm, that their presence can be relied upon. But predictions require data, and data requires time. This is why trust cannot be manufactured or forced. It must be earned through consistency, through the gradual accumulation of moments where someone proves that they are who they say they are, that their care is not conditional, that they will not disappear, when things become difficult. There is a particular vulnerability in trusting. It requires allowing someone access to the parts of yourself that could be hurt, the tender places that are usually kept hidden. When you trust someone, you are giving them the power to wound you, and the brain knows this. It remembers every time trust has been broken in the past, every betrayal, every disappointment, and it uses those memories as a warning system. This is not pessimism. It is protection. The brain's job is to keep you safe, and it will not relinquish that job lightly. It will test the other person, often without you realizing it, watching for signs of inconsistency, for red flags, for any indication that this person might not be safe after all. But when those tests are passed, when the person remains steady even when you are not at your best, something remarkable happens. The brain begins to recalibrate. The old predictions formed in previous relationships or childhood experiences start to soften. New data is integrated, and slowly, incrementally, the sense of safety deepens. You find yourself sharing more, risking more, allowing more of your true self to be seen. Not because you have decided to, but because the brain has decided for you. It has determined, based on the evidence, that this person is trustworthy. And now it is encouraging you to lean into that trust, to build upon it, to see how far it can go. Trust in relationships creates a kind of feedback loop. The more you trust, the more vulnerable you become. The more vulnerable you become, the more opportunities the other person has to respond with care. And the more they respond with care, the deeper the trust grows. This is why secure relationships feel so different from insecure ones. In secure relationships, both people are caught in this upward spiral, where trust begets vulnerability, begets deeper connection. In insecure relationships, the spiral moves in the other direction. Distrust leads to guardedness, which prevents true intimacy, which reinforces the sense that it is not safe to open up. And so the cycle continues, each person locked in their own protective patterns, unable to reach the other. Breaking out of that cycle requires someone to take a risk, to extend trust even when it feels uncertain. But the risk is not blind. It is calculated, based on small signs that the other person might be capable of meeting that trust with care. A moment of kindness, a gesture of patience, a willingness to listen without judgment. These are the openings through which trust can begin to enter, the small cracks in the armor that allow light to filter through. And if those openings are met with gentleness, if the vulnerability is honored rather than exploited, the brain takes note. It files this away as evidence that maybe, just maybe, it is safe to try again. There's a quietness to trust when it is fully established. It does not need constant reassurance. It does not demand proof with every interaction. It simply exists, a steady undercurrent that allows the relationship to flow without constant questioning. You know, without having to think about it, that this person will be there, that they will keep their word, that they will not suddenly change the rules or withdraw their care. And in that knowing, a deep kind of peace becomes possible. The mind can rest. The body can relax. The constant vigilance that defines so much of human existence can, at least in this one relationship, be set aside. This is the quiet bond that trust creates. Not loud, not showy, but enduring. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Without it, love remains fragile, always tinged with the fear that it might disappear. But with it, with the slow, patient construction of trust through consistency and care, love becomes something that can weather storms, that can hold steady even when everything else feels uncertain. It becomes a place where the mind can return again and again, knowing that it will be met with the same gentle reliability that first allowed it to open. And that, more than any grand gesture or declaration, is what the heart seeks most. Not intensity, but constancy. Not passion, but presence. Not perfection, but the simple, enduring promise that this person will stay. As we drift deeper into the softer territories where the self meets another, love reveals itself as something quieter than we often imagine. It is not always about being admired or desired, though those feelings have their place. At its core, love is the experience of being seen, not observed from a distance, not judged or evaluated, but truly seen, recognized, witnessed in a way that says, I know who you are, and that knowing does not make me turn away. This is what the mind craves more than almost anything else. Not to be perfect, but to be known. Not to hide, but to be met exactly where you are, without having to perform or pretend. There's a loneliness that comes from being misunderstood, from feeling that no one quite grasps what you're trying to communicate, what you need, what matters to you. It is a particular kind of ache, one that cannot be solved by simply being around people. You can be in a crowded room and still feel unseen, still feel that the version of you that others are responding to is not quite real, not quite whole. But when someone truly sees you, when they pay attention not just to your words, but to the meaning beneath them, to the emotions you are trying to navigate, to the person you are becoming, that loneliness begins to lift. The sense of Bay and G fundamentally alone in the world starts to soften, and in its place, a new feeling emerges. The feeling of being held, not physically, but psychologically. The feeling that your inner world, with all its complexity and contradiction, is understood. Psychologists have found that feeling seen and understood is one of the strongest predictors of relationship satisfaction. It matters more than how often couples argue, more than how they divide household tasks, more than many of the surface-level factors we often focus on. Because when you feel seen, when your partner demonstrates that they understand what you're feeling and why, the brain registers this as profound safety. It is the message that you are not too much, not too difficult, not too broken. It is the reassurance that your internal experience, however messy or uncertain, is something another person can hold without flinching. This kind of recognition requires more than just attention. It requires empathy, the willingness to step outside your own perspective and imagine what the world looks like from where the other person stands. And it requires validation, the ability to communicate that what they are feeling makes sense, that it is understandable given the circumstances, that it does not need to be fixed or dismissed, but simply acknowledged. When someone says, I see why that hurt you, or that sounds really hard, they are offering more than sympathy. They are offering the gift of recognition, the message that your experience is real and worthy of care. But being seen is not only about difficult emotions. It is also about being recognized in your joy, your excitement, your passions and interests. When someone remembers the small details of your life, when they ask about the project you mentioned weeks ago, when they notice that you seem lighter today and comment on it, they are telling you that you matter. that the specifics of your existence are worth paying attention to, that you are not just a role or a function, but a whole, complex person whose inner world is interesting and valuable. There is a particular kind of intimacy that comes from this. It is not dramatic or intense. It is quiet, steady, built from countless small moments of recognition. Over time, these moments accumulate, creating a sense that this person really knows you. Not the version of you that you present to the world, but the version that exists in private, in the spaces where you are uncertain or afraid or simply yourself, without any particular goal. And when you feel known in this way, when your inner landscape has been witnessed and accepted, something in the nervous system settles. The constant effort of managing how you are perceived, of trying to be understood, begins to ease. You can simply be, and that being is enough. This is why love, at its best, feels like coming home. Not because the other person completes you or fixes you, but because they see you. They recognize the contours of who you are, and they do not require you to be different. They are comfortable with your complexity, your contradictions, the ways you are still figuring things out. And in that comfort, you find your own. You stop trying so hard to be acceptable, to be easy, to be whatever you think you should be. You begin to trust that you are enough as you are. And that trust, that quiet certainty that you can be fully yourself and still be loved, is one of the most healing experiences a human being can have. The brain responds to this recognition in measurable ways. Stress decreases. Emotional regulation improves. The sense of isolation that so often accompanies modern life begins to recede, because you are not alone. Someone else is carrying an understanding of who you are, is holding that knowledge gently, is weaving it into how they relate to you. And that, more than any grand gesture or declaration, is what allows love to feel safe enough to last. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. Not because there is no conflict, but because even in conflict, you trust that you will still be seen, still be understood, still be met with the same care that first allowed you to open. And that trust, quiet and enduring, is what transforms love from a feeling into a foundation. In another corner of this ancient world, where the present dissolves into the past, the mind holds onto moments. Not all of them, not even most of them, but the ones that matter, the ones that carried emotional weight, that marked the territory of connection. Memory is selective. It stores not objective facts, but felt experience, the sensory details that accompanied significant events. The way the light fell, the sound of laughter, the warmth of a touch. And as time passes, as more memories accumulate, they begin to form a kind of emotional archive, a collection of experiences that the brain uses to define the relationship, to understand its meaning and its value. This is how shared memory deepens love. Each experience you have together, each moment that is emotionally resonant, becomes part of the story the brain tells itself about this connection. When you recall these memories, the brain does not simply replay them. It reactivates the emotions associated with them, bringing the past into the present in a way that makes it feel immediate, alive. This is why reminiscing can feel so powerful, why talking about old times can bring a couple closer. They are not just recounting events. They are reliving the emotional fabric of their shared history, reinforcing the bond that those experiences created. Psychologists have found that couples who have a rich store of positive shared memories tend to be more satisfied and more resilient. When challenges arise, when the present feels difficult, these memories act as a kind of emotional ballast, a reminder that the relationship has value, that it has brought joy and comfort and meaning. The brain uses the past to predict the future. If the past has been mostly good, mostly safe, the brain is more willing to invest in the future, to believe that the relationship is worth maintaining even when it requires effort. But if the past is marked by pain or disappointment, the brain becomes more cautious, more hesitant to continue investing. This is not conscious deliberation. It is the automatic weighing of evidence that happens beneath awareness, shaping how you feel about the relationship without you having to decide. But memory is not static. Every time you recall a moment, you are subtly reshaping it, influenced by your current emotional state and the context in which the memory arises. This means that how you talk about your shared past matters. Couples who frame their history in positive terms, who emphasize the good times and downplay the difficulties, tend to feel more satisfied than those who focus on what went wrong. This is not denial. It is perspective, the recognition that memory is flexible, that the story you tell about your relationship influences how you feel about it in the present. And so, the act of reminiscing together, of choosing to highlight the moments of joy and connection, becomes a way of strengthening the bond, of reminding both brains that this relationship is a source of positive emotion, of warmth, of belonging. There's a particular tenderness in shared memory, a sense that the two of you carry a history that no one else has access to. These moments, these experiences, belong to you both. They are the private language of your connection, the inside jokes and callbacks and references that only make sense to the two of you. And in that privacy, in that exclusivity, there is intimacy. You are not just two individuals who happen to be together. You are a unit with a shared past, a joint narrative that extends back in time and will, if the relationship continues, extend into the future. Nostalgia, when it is shared, can be deeply bonding. It is not about longing for the past to return, but about honoring what was, about recognizing the journey the relationship has taken. When you look back together at where you started, at the early days when everything was new and uncertain, and compare it to where you are now, there is often a sense of pride, of accomplishment. You have built something. You have created a history. And that history is not just a collection of events, but a testament to your commitment, your care, your willingness to show up for each other across time. The brain uses memory to create continuity. Without it, each moment would feel isolated, disconnected from what came before. But with it, with the ability to recall and reflect on the past, the relationship takes on a depth that cannot be achieved through present experience alone. You know each other not just as you are now, but as you have been. You have seen each other grow, change, struggle, succeed. And that knowledge, that longitudinal understanding, creates a kind of security. You are not relying on a single snapshot, a single version of the person. You have watched them move through time, and that movement, with all its complexity and contradiction, is part of what you love. So the memories continue to accumulate, each one adding to the emotional architecture of the relationship. Some will fade, their details becoming hazy, but the feeling they carried will remain, a vague warmth or comfort that influences how you feel in the present. Others will stay sharp, will be recalled again and again, becoming touchstones, moments you return to when you need reassurance or connection. And together, these memories create a foundation. Not loud, not always visible, but always there, quietly shaping how you experience the person beside you, how you understand the bond between you, how you imagine the future you are building together. And so the story continues, gently unfolding as we arrive at the edge where protection dissolves. Vulnerability is a word that carries weight, often framed as risk or exposure, something to be managed or avoided. But in the quiet psychology of love, vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway through which true connection becomes possible. When you allow someone to see the parts of yourself that are uncertain, unfinished, afraid, you are offering them access to your inner world. And if they meet that offering with care, if they do not use it against you or turn away, the bond between you deepens in a way that surface-level interaction never could. The brain is designed to protect. It builds walls, defenses, strategies for managing how much of yourself you reveal. This is not pathology. It is survival. Early in life, we learn that not everyone is safe, that some people will use vulnerability as a weapon, that openness can lead to pain. And so we develop armor, ways of presenting ourselves that minimize risk. We laugh things off. We change the subject. We keep conversations light, pleasant, manageable. And this works to a point. It allows us to navigate the world without constant emotional injury. But it also prevents the kind of intimacy that the heart longs for. Because intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires the willingness to be seen not just at your best, but at your most human. There is a particular kind of courage in allowing yourself to be vulnerable with another person. It is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, almost invisible from the outside. It is the decision to say, I'm struggling, when it would be easier to say, I'm fine. It is the choice to admit uncertainty, to ask for help, to let someone see that you do not have everything figured out. These moments feel small, but they are not. They are the moments when the relationship has the opportunity to deepen, when the other person can show whether they are capable of holding your vulnerability with gentleness. Psychologists have studied vulnerability extensively, and what they have found is that it is essential for secure attachment. When both people in a relationship are willing to be vulnerable, when both are willing to share not just their strengths, but their struggles, the connection becomes more resilient. It can hold more complexity, more honesty, more of the full range of human experience. But if one person is always armored, always managing their image, the relationship remains at a certain distance. It can be pleasant, even functional, but it will not reach the depth that comes from mutual openness. Vulnerability is not about oversharing or dumping every difficult emotion onto another person. It is about appropriate disclosure, about being willing to share what is real for you in a way that invites connection rather than overwhelms. It is about trusting that the other person has the capacity to hear you, to sit with what you are experiencing, to respond in a way that honors your feelings without trying to fix them or make them go away. This kind of trust takes time to build. It requires that the other person has proven, through repeated interactions, that they can be trusted with the tender parts of you. And when that trust is established, when vulnerability is met with care more often than not, something remarkable happens. The armor begins to feel less necessary. The constant vigilance, the effort of always managing how you are perceived, starts to ease. You find yourself being more honest, more direct, more willing to share what is actually happening inside you. Not because you have decided to, but because the brain has determined that it is safe, that this person has earned access, that the risk of being hurt is outweighed by the relief of being known. There is a particular intimacy in being vulnerable together, in both people lowering their defenses at the same time. It creates a kind of mutual exposure, a shared experience of uncertainty that paradoxically makes both people feel less alone. When you admit that you are struggling and the other person says, "I am too," the sense of isolation begins to lift. You are not the only one who is uncertain, who is afraid, who is figuring it out as you go. And in that recognition, in that shared humanity, the connection deepens. Not because you have solved anything, but because you have acknowledged reality together, have faced it without pretense or performance. The brain responds to this kind of vulnerability with increased oxytocin, the bonding hormone that reinforces connection. When you are vulnerable, and that vulnerability is met with acceptance, the nervous system registers this as profound safety. It is the message that you do not have to be perfect, do not have to have it all together, do not have to hide. And that message, repeated over time, begins to reshape how you experience the relationship. It becomes a place where you can rest, where you can show up exactly as you are, where the exhausting work of managing your image can finally be set down. This is the quiet role of vulnerability in love. It is not about weakness. It is about trust. It is about the gradual lowering of defenses in the presence of someone who has shown that they will not exploit that openness, who will meet it instead with care and understanding. And in that meeting, in that gentle exchange of inner worlds, love becomes more than companionship. It becomes refuge, a place where the mind can finally, gently exhale. Far beneath that quiet surface, where the self is formed and reformed across the years, patterns emerge. They are not chosen, not deliberate, but they shape everything. Attachment styles, those deep psychological templates formed in early relationships, influence how we approach love throughout life. They are not destiny, not fixed, but they are persistent, quietly shaping how we respond to closeness, to conflict, to the inevitable uncertainties that arise when two people try to build something together. Understanding these patterns does not fix them, but it does offer something equally valuable: perspective. The awareness that the way you experience love is not random, not a failing, but a learned response that made sense at one time, even if it no longer serves you. Psychologists identify 4 primary attachment styles, each reflecting a different learned strategy for navigating relationships. Secure attachment, the pattern that most supports emotional well-being, develops when early caregivers are consistently responsive, when the child learns that their needs will be met, that the world is a place where comfort can be found. People with secure attachment tend to feel comfortable with intimacy, do not fear abandonment excessively, and can communicate their needs without anxiety. They have learned, deep in their bones, that connection is safe, that vulnerability will not be punished, that the people they love will remain even when things are difficult. But not everyone learns this. Anxious attachment develops when care is inconsistent, when love feels conditional or unpredictable. The The child learns that sometimes their needs are met and sometimes they are not, and they cannot determine what makes the difference. This creates a kind of vigilance, a constant scanning for signs that the other person might leave, might withdraw, might stop caring. People with anxious attachment often crave closeness, but fear it at the same time. They worry about being too much, about driving the other person away, but they also struggle to regulate their own emotions without external reassurance. They have learned that love is uncertain, that it must be pursued and proven again and again. Avoidant attachment emerges when a child learns that their emotional needs will not be met, that expressing vulnerability leads not to comfort, but to dismissal or rejection. And so they learn to suppress those needs, to become self-reliant, to avoid depending on others. People with avoidant attachment often value independence highly, feel uncomfortable with too much closeness, and may withdraw when a partner seeks intimacy. This is not coldness, it is protection. They have learned that opening up leads to pain, and so they keep their distance, maintaining control by not allowing themselves to need too much. The fourth style, disorganized attachment, arises from environments where caregivers are frightening or chaotic, where the person who should provide safety is also a source of fear. This creates a profound internal conflict. The need for connection pulls the person toward others, but the expectation of harm pushes them away. People with disorganized attachment often struggle with relationships, alternating between desperate closeness and sudden withdrawal, unable to find a stable way of being with another person. They have learned that relationships are both necessary and dangerous, and they cannot resolve that contradiction. None of these patterns are judgments. They are adaptations, strategies that allowed a child to survive their particular environment. But the strategies that protect a child are not always the same strategies that support a healthy adult relationship. And so part of the work of love is recognizing these patterns, noticing how they shape your responses, and slowly, gently, learning to choose differently. Not because the old pattern was wrong, but because it no longer fits the current reality. This process is not fast. The brain does not easily rewrite patterns that were formed so early, that have been reinforced across so many years. But it is possible. Secure attachment can be earned, even if it was not learned in childhood. When you are in a relationship with someone who is consistently responsive, who meets your vulnerability with care, who does not punish you for having needs, the brain begins to recalibrate. The old expectations start to soften. New patterns form, ones that reflect this current relationship rather than the past. And over time, the anxious vigilance or the avoidant distance begins to ease. Not because you have forced yourself to change, but because the brain has gathered enough evidence to believe that this time, this person is different. There is a particular peace that comes from understanding your attachment style, from recognizing that the way you respond to love is not a personal failing, but a learned pattern. It allows for self-compassion, for the recognition that you are doing the best you can with the tools you were given. And it also allows for communication, for the ability to say to a partner, when you do this, it triggers my fear of abandonment. Or when you ask for closeness, I feel overwhelmed because I learned to equate closeness with loss of self. These conversations are not easy, but they create a kind of transparency that makes it possible to work with the patterns rather than being controlled by them. And so the mind continues its slow work, shaped by the past, but not imprisoned by it. Attachment styles are not destiny. They are starting points, templates that can be revised, updated, softened through the experience of consistent, caring connection. The brain is always learning, always adapting. And when it is given the right environment, when it is held in a relationship that offers both safety and challenge, it can learn new ways of being, not through force, not through willpower, but through the gentle, repeated experience of being loved in a way that allows the old defenses to finally, slowly rest. As we drift deeper into territories where the body and mind are no longer separate, love reveals another face. It is not just emotion, not just thought, not just chemistry. It is regulation. It is the nervous system learning to find balance not alone, but in the presence of another. When you are stressed, when the world feels overwhelming, the body responds with a cascade of physiological changes. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense. The mind narrows its focus, scanning for threat. This is the sympathetic nervous system activating, preparing you to fight or flee. It is ancient, automatic, and exhausting when sustained too long. But then someone you love enters the room. They do not need to say anything. Their presence alone begins to shift something. Your breathing slows to match theirs. Your heart rate begins to decrease. The tension in your shoulders starts to ease. This is co-regulation, the process by which one nervous system helps another find calm. It is not conscious. It is not a decision. It is biology responding to biology, two systems synchronizing in a way that brings both closer to balance. And this, more than any words or actions, is one of the most profound ways that love serves the body. Psychologists have studied co-regulation extensively, particularly in parent-child relationships, where it is essential for development. When a caregiver responds to an infant's distress with calm presence and soothing touch, the infant's nervous system learns to return to baseline, learns that overwhelming feelings are temporary, that equilibrium can be restored. This is the foundation of emotional regulation, and it continues to matter throughout life. Adults, too, need to be co-regulated, need the presence of others to help them navigate difficult emotional states. We are not designed to regulate ourselves in isolation. We are social creatures, and our nervous systems are built to rely on each other. There's a particular gift in being with someone whose presence calms you, not because they fix your problems or tell you what to do, but simply because their nervous system is steady enough to offer yours a reference point. When you are anxious and they remain calm, your body begins to entrain to theirs, to match their slower breathing, their more relaxed posture. This is not about suppressing your feelings or pretending everything is fine. It is about the nervous system recognizing that it does not have to carry the stress alone, that there is another system nearby that is calm, and that calmness can be borrowed, can be used as a guide back to center. But co-regulation is not one-directional. It flows both ways. When you are calm and your partner is stressed, your presence can offer them the same gift. This is why relationships feel so stabilizing when they are healthy. They create a kind of mutual support system where both people are resources for each other's nervous systems. When one is struggling, the other can hold steady. And when both are struggling, they can at least struggle together, can find a kind of solace in shared experience that is not available in isolation. The brain tracks this. It notices when another person's presence makes things feel more manageable, when their touch or voice, or even just their proximity, brings relief. And over time, that person becomes associated with regulation, with the feeling of returning to balance. This is part of why long-term partners can have such a profound impact on each other's health. They are not just companions. They are co-regulators, helping each other's nervous systems navigate the constant fluctuations of stress and calm that define daily life. And when that relationship is lost, when that person is no longer present, the remaining partner often struggles not just emotionally, but physiologically. Their system has lost its primary co-regulator, and it takes time to learn how to find balance alone again. There's a quietness to this process, a subtlety that makes it easy to overlook. Co-regulation does not announce itself. It simply happens beneath awareness in the background of every interaction. But its effects are profound. Relationships that offer consistent co-regulation tend to support better physical health, lower rates of illness, longer life expectancy. This is not magic. It is the body responding to the presence of safety, to the feeling that it is not alone in managing the demands of existence. And that feeling, quiet and unassuming, is one of the most healing experiences a human being can have. Love, then, is not just connection. It is a regulating force. It is the way two nervous systems find each other and create a kind of mutual homeostasis, a balance that neither could achieve as easily alone. And this balance, sustained over time, becomes part of the foundation of well-being. It is not that the loved one solves all problems or removes all stress. It is that their presence makes stress more manageable, makes the difficult moments feel less overwhelming, makes the return to calm feel more accessible. And in that accessibility, in that gentle support, the body finds a kind of rest that allows it to function more smoothly, to heal more readily, to carry the weight of life with a little more ease. In another corner of this ancient world, where grand gestures fade and daily life unfolds, love shows its truest face. It is not in the dramatic declarations or the sweeping romantic moments that love is sustained. It is in the small, repeated acts of care that happen without fanfare, without expectation of recognition. The coffee brought to bed on a weekend morning. The text sent in the middle of the day just to check in. The willingness to listen to the same story again, to hold space for emotions that have been shared before, to show up even when it is inconvenient. These are the building blocks of lasting affection, the quiet gestures that tell the brain again and again that this person cares. Psychologists have found that it is not the big moments that determine relationship satisfaction, but the accumulation of small ones. The way partners respond to each other's bids for attention, the tiny requests for connection that happen throughout the day. When someone shares a thought or a feeling or a random observation, they are reaching out, testing to see if the other person will engage. And how that bid is met matters. If it is ignored or dismissed, the brain registers disconnection. But if it is acknowledged, even briefly, the brain registers care. And over time, these responses accumulate, creating either a sense of being attended to or a sense of being alone even when together. Kindness in relationships is not about grand sacrifices. It is about consistent small attentions, the willingness to prioritize the other person's well-being even in minor ways. It is choosing to be patient when you are tired, choosing to ask about their day even when yours was difficult, choosing to offer comfort even when you are not sure what to say. These choices, made repeatedly, create a foundation of care that the relationship can rest upon. And that foundation, built slowly and without drama, is what allows the relationship to weather the inevitable challenges that arise. There is a particular warmth that comes from being cared for in small ways. It is not the intensity of passion, not the thrill of romance, but something deeper and more sustaining. It is the feeling of being thought about, of mattering enough that someone takes the time to do something kind, even when there is nothing to be gained from it. When someone picks up your favorite snack at the store, when they remember the thing you mentioned wanting to watch, when they adjust their schedule to accommodate yours, they are saying, without words, "You are important to me." And the brain, always listening for these messages, takes note. This is not transactional. It is not about keeping score or ensuring that kindness is reciprocated in equal measure. It is about creating a culture of care within the relationship, a shared understanding that both people are committed to each other's well-being. When both are doing this, when both are looking for small ways to ease the other's burden, the relationship takes on a kind of resilience. Conflicts still arise, disappointments still occur, but they are held within a larger context of care that makes them easier to navigate. The brain remembers not just the difficulty, but the steady kindness that surrounds it. And that memory shapes how the challenge is interpreted, how much weight it is given, how much threat it represents to the bond. There is research showing that simple acts of appreciation, the willingness to notice and acknowledge what the other person does, significantly strengthen relationships. When you say thank you, when you express gratitude for something that might seem small or obvious, you are reinforcing the other person's efforts, telling them that their care is seen and valued. This is not manipulation. It is recognition. It is the understanding that people need to feel that their contributions matter, that the things they do to support the relationship are not taken for granted. And when that recognition is present, when both people feel appreciated, the motivation to continue caring remains strong. So the small gestures continue, day after day, unremarkable in isolation, but powerful in accumulation. They do not make the relationship easy. They do not prevent conflict or guarantee happiness, but they create a baseline of care, a quiet assurance that this person is on your side, that they are paying attention, that they are willing to invest in your well-being even when no one is watching. And that assurance, steady and unassuming, is what allows love to feel safe enough to last. Not because it is perfect, but because it is consistent. Not because there are no challenges, but because the challenges are met within a relationship that has been fortified day after day by the simple, quiet power of kindness. And so the story continues, gently unfolding as we arrive at the place where time has done its work. Long-term love is different from the love that arrives in a rush, that sweeps you up with intensity and promise. It is quieter, more textured, shaped by years of shared experience and the slow accumulation of trust. It is love that has been tested and has held. Love that has weathered disappointment and conflict and the inevitable changing of both people as they move through life. And what it offers, in place of intensity, is stability. A kind of emotional anchor that makes the rest of life more navigable, that provides a steady reference point in a world that is often uncertain. Psychologists have studied long-term relationships extensively, trying to understand what allows some to thrive while others deteriorate. And what they have found is that the relationships that last are not necessarily the ones without conflict, not the ones where both people are always happy. They are the ones where both people remain committed, where both continue to prioritize the relationship even when it is not easy, where both have learned to navigate differences without letting them become deal breakers. These relationships develop a kind of resilience, a flexibility that allows them to bend without breaking. There's a particular kind of knowing that comes from being with someone for years. You have seen them at their best and at their worst. You have witnessed their growth and their setbacks, their strengths and their limitations. And through all of that, you have chosen to stay. This choice, made repeatedly across time, creates a bond that feels almost unshakable. Not because the person is perfect, but because the relationship has survived imperfection. Because you have learned that love is not about finding someone without flaws, but about finding someone whose flaws you can live with, whose struggles you can hold with compassion, whose humanity you can honor even when it is inconvenient. Long-term love offers something that new love cannot: history. A shared narrative that extends back years, filled with moments that only the two of you remember. Inside jokes that have evolved over time. Traditions that have formed without anyone deciding to create them. This history becomes part of the relationship's identity. A reminder that you have built something together, that you are not just two individuals who happen to be in the same place, but a unit with a past and a future. A story that belongs to both of you. The brain responds to this stability. When a relationship has endured, when it has proven itself reliable across time, the nervous system can relax in a way that is not possible in newer connections. There is no need to constantly test the bond, to wonder if it will hold. It has already held, again and again, through circumstances both ordinary and extraordinary. And that track record, that evidence of durability, allows the mind to rest into the relationship, to trust it at a level that goes beyond conscious thought. The body knows, without having to deliberate, that this person will remain. And in that knowing, a deep kind of peace becomes possible. But long-term love is not static. It requires ongoing attention, ongoing investment. The brain habituates to familiar stimuli, which means that the presence of a long-term partner can start to feel so routine that it is taken for granted. This is where intentionality matters, making the choice to prioritizing the relationship, to continue expressing care and appreciation, to continue seeking connection even when life is busy. Long-term couples who remain satisfied are the ones who continue to engage with each other, who continue to be curious about each other's inner lives, who treat the relationship not as something completed, but as something ongoing, always evolving. There is a quietness to long-term love that can be mistaken for absence of feeling. But it is not absence. It is depth. It is love that has moved beyond the need to constantly prove itself, that has settled into a steady presence that does not demand attention, but is always there. It is the feeling of waking up next to someone and not having to wonder if they will still be there tomorrow, not having to manage anxiety about the relationship's future, because the future has already become the present again and again, and the pattern is clear. This person stays, and in that staying, in that quiet endurance, the relationship becomes one of the most stabilizing forces in a person's life. It is not that problems disappear or that everything becomes easy. It is that you are not facing life alone, that there is someone who knows your history, who understands your context, who can hold your current struggles with the perspective of everything you have already navigated together. And that perspective, that long view, makes the current challenges feel more manageable, because you have been through difficult things before and you have come through them together. And the brain, remembering this, feels less alarmed by the present difficulty. It trusts, based on past evidence, that this too can be navigated, that the relationship will hold. Far beneath that quiet surface, where the heart sometimes clenches, fear lives. It is not always loud, not always obvious, but it is there, whispering doubts, raising questions, scanning for signs that love might not be safe after all. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. These fears are not irrational. They are based on past experiences, on the brain's accumulated knowledge that relationships can end, that people can leave, that love does not always last. And so the mind, in its attempt to protect, becomes vigilant. It looks for evidence that this time might be different, or that this time might be the same. And in that looking, it can sometimes create the very problems it fears. Psychologists understand that fear in relationships is normal, especially for those with insecure attachment histories. The fear is not the problem. The problem is how the fear is managed, whether it is allowed to dictate behavior, whether it drives the person to seek constant reassurance or to withdraw preemptively. When fear is in control, the relationship becomes a source of anxiety rather than comfort. Every interaction is filtered through the lens of potential loss. Every silence is interpreted as rejection. Every moment of distance feels like the beginning of the end. And in this state, it is almost impossible to experience the relationship as it actually is, because the mind is too busy defending against what it might become. But fear can be soothed gently through repeated experiences of safety. When someone continues to show up, continues to be consistent, continues to offer reassurance not just once, but many times, the brain begins to gather evidence that maybe, in this case, the fear is not warranted. This is not a fast process. The brain does not relinquish its protective strategies easily. It tests the other person, often without conscious awareness, looking for signs of inconsistency, for moments where the fear will be confirmed. And if those moments do not come, if the person remains steady even when tested, the fear begins to quiet. Not disappear, but soften, becoming less urgent, less consuming. There is a particular kind of bravery in allowing yourself to stay in a relationship even when fear arises. It would be easier to leave, to protect yourself from the possibility of future pain by avoiding vulnerability altogether. But staying, choosing to remain present even when the fear whispers that you should run, that is an act of courage. It is the decision to trust, not blindly, but based on the evidence the other person has provided, that they are worth the risk. And when that trust is honored, when the person continues to prove that they are reliable, the fear loses some of its power. It no longer dictates the relationship's terms. It becomes just one voice among many, rather than the only voice that matters. Reassurance plays a critical role in managing fear within relationships. Not excessive reassurance, which can become a cycle of neediness and exhaustion, but appropriate reassurance, the kind that acknowledges the fear without judgment and offers steady, consistent evidence that the fear is not based in current reality. When someone says, "I'm not going anywhere," and then backs, that statement up with action, with presence, with the willingness to stay even when things are difficult, the brain takes note. It files this away as evidence, and over time, the accumulated evidence begins to outweigh the old fears, begins to create a new expectation that this person, this relationship, is different. There is also the fear that arises not from the past, but from the present. The fear that you are not enough, that you will disappoint the other person, that they will eventually see through the version of you that you present and decide you are not worth staying for. This fear is particularly insidious because it often leads to people hiding parts of themselves, to performing rather than being authentic, to managing the relationship so carefully that spontaneity and genuine connection become difficult. But the antidote to this fear is the same as the antidote to fear of abandonment: vulnerability met with acceptance. When you show the other person who you really are, including the parts you are ashamed of or uncertain about, and they do not turn away, the fear begins to lose its grip. Because the thing you were most afraid of, that they would reject the real you, did not happen. And with each instance of acceptance, the fear recedes a little further. The mind is capable of immense growth, but it needs the right environment. When a relationship offers safety, when it provides repeated experiences of being met with care rather than judgment, the brain begins to revise its expectations. Fear does not have to be the dominant emotion. It can become background noise, a reminder to pay attention, but not a force that controls behavior. And in that shift, the relationship transforms. It stops being a source of constant anxiety and becomes instead a source of comfort, a place where the mind can rest, where the vigilance can finally soften, where the possibility of being loved without fear can, gently and quietly, become real. And so we arrive at last at the place where the journey softens into stillness. Love, in its truest form, is not a destination, but a resting place. It is not something to be achieved or earned, not something that requires constant effort to maintain, but something that simply is. A state of being where the mind and body can finally let go, where the defenses that have protected for so long can be set down, where the constant striving to be more or better or different can cease. This is love as refuge. Love as the quiet space where you are allowed to be exactly as you are, without apology, without performance, without fear that you will be asked to leave. Psychologists speak of secure attachment as the foundation of healthy relationships, and at its core, secure attachment is simply this: the felt sense that you are safe, that the person you love will not harm you, will not abandon you, will hold your humanity with gentleness. It is not about perfection, not about the absence of conflict or difficulty. It is about trust, the deep, abiding trust that even when things are hard, even when you are struggling, the relationship will hold, that the other person will remain, will continue to care, will meet your vulnerability with compassion rather than judgment. This is what the mind seeks most. Not intensity, not passion, not the dramatic ups and downs that are so often romanticized, but peace, the simple, profound peace of being known and still being loved, of being seen in your entirety, flaws and fears and contradictions included, and having someone choose to stay. This is the gift of long-term, secure love. It offers a kind of internal stability that is difficult to achieve alone, a sense that no matter what happens in the external world, there is at least one place, one relationship where you are safe. There is a particular relief in this. So much of life requires constant vigilance, constant management of how you are perceived, constant adjustment to meet the demands of work, of social expectations, of the roles you are asked to play. But in a relationship that has become a resting place, that vigilance can drop. You do not need to manage the other person's perception of you. You do not need to hide your tiredness or your uncertainty or your moments of weakness. You can simply be in all your messy humanity and trust that this will be enough. That the other person is not looking for perfection, but for authenticity, for the real you, however that unfolds in any given moment. The brain responds to this kind of safety with profound relaxation. Stress hormones decrease. The immune system functions more effectively. Sleep improves. Emotional regulation becomes easier. This is not metaphor. This is the body responding to the environment the relationship has created, an environment where the nervous system no longer needs to be constantly alert, where it can finally rest into the support that is available. And in that rest, healing becomes possible. Old wounds, carried for years, beg to soften. The hypervigilance that trauma or difficult early relationships created begins to ease. Not because someone has fixed you, but because you have been given the space to exist without having to defend yourself. And in that space, the natural processes of psychological integration can unfold. Love as a resting place is not passive. It is actively maintained through the choices both people make, the decision to continue prioritizing the relationship, to continue treating each other with kindness, to continue showing up even when it is not convenient. But the maintenance does not feel like burden when the relationship is functioning well. It feels like care, like tending to something valuable, like nurturing a space that nourishes both people. And that care, exchanged over time, creates a bond that feels almost unbreakable. Not because it cannot be harmed, but because both people are invested in protecting it, in keeping it safe, in ensuring that it remains the refuge it has become. There's a quietness to this final stage of love, a lack of drama that can make it seem unremarkable to those who are chasing intensity. But for those who have found it, for those who have arrived at the place where love is no longer a question, but a given, the quietness is not absence. It is peace. It is the end of searching, the end of proving, the end of wondering if you are enough. It is the deep, abiding knowledge that you are, that you have been, that you always will be, at least in this one relationship, enough exactly as you are. And And so the mind, which has worked so hard for so long, which has navigated fear and uncertainty and the constant demands of existence, can finally exhale, can finally let the weight of self-protection drop, can finally rest into the knowledge that it is not alone, that it is held, that it is safe. This is what love offers when it has matured, when it has been given time and care and the space to deepen. Not fireworks, not intensity, but something far more valuable. A place to rest, a place to be, a place where the heart at last can be still. And here, in this soft and quiet place, we pause. Let the thoughts drift like slow clouds. Let the weight of the day dissolve. Let yourself rest into the warmth of understanding, of being human, of loving and being loved. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. Simply be here, gently held by the quiet psychology of love as the world softens around you and sleep begins to arrive.